Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. GOP Rep Babin of Texas has introduced H.R. 4321 to prohibit the United States government from providing bailouts or other financial assistance to any state or local government that enacts any law providing reparations for slavery and for other purposes. We're going to discuss that this morning. President Joe Biden also has planned to establish a national monument honoring Emmett Till, the Black teenager from Chicago who was abducted, tortured, and killed in 1955 after he was accused of
about
whistling at
reparations.
a white woman
And
in
the thing
Mississippi
about these white
and his
supremacists
mother.
is that they don't even know why they
Now,
hate black people,
surrounding the
right?
alleged kidnapping
When
of
in
Carlee
actuality,
Russell, which Alabama
black
police
people are
said
your
they
innocent.
couldn't verify,
They're the
threatens to overshadow the thousands of unresolved cases of missing black people, according to advocates. We'll see the effect that Carlee Russell's situation has had on missing black folks in general. And a black man who says he was elected mayor of a rural Alabama town but has been kept from taking office by white leaders of the town has filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. We're going to discuss that and more this morning on Let It Be Known with the one and only, the attorney Robert Tarver. Good morning, Attorney Tarver. When you come off mute, we can say good
There
morning.
we go. Good morning. It's still a good morning. Good
It's
morning.
still a good morning. It's always good to have Attorney Tarver from New Jersey. It's another one of those days. Attorney Tarver says it's just great to be alive, right?
Yeah, it's great to be alive. But hey, we're in an amazing time. I'll tell you what. I would not take another time to be alive. The things that I've seen in my lifetime, and particularly what's going on now, most of us would never have been able to dream that would see the amount of white backlash, white supremacy actions, overt actions, just clearly aimed at placing Black Americans in a second-class status.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that is a great segue to start with Rep Babin. Texas lawmakers are trying to block federal funding for states that create laws to pay reparations for slavery. Five-term U.S. Rep Babin introduced H.R. 4321 with 13 co-sponsors. He says American taxpayers shouldn't be forced to pay for, quote, radical race-based reparation payments to please the woke left. The bill would prohibit the federal government from providing financial assistance to states, local counties, and municipalities that approve reparations laws. We know Attorney Tarver just recently, Evanston, Illinois, began paying out payments, reparation style payments of $25,000 to certain Black residents. And of course, Sheila Jackson Lee's HR 40 has been sitting still for ever. And of course, California, its task force has recommended reparations payments to Black citizens, as well as the city of San Francisco. So again, they're showing it's no longer a doubt as who these people are, right?
So Babin says that this is radical. But think about this. Our whole system of justice is based on making people whole for the injury that they received, right? I mean, that's a basic notion. So if you're going to accept that you enslaved Black people, that you not only enslaved them, but you treated them as fourth class citizens, in fact, inhumanly and not human for decades, hundreds of years, it only seems reasonable that you would do something about it. So it's not radical. It was done with the Japanese after their internment in California and other places during World War II. Why should Black people be subject to anything less, particularly since we were involved in slavery? It just makes absolutely no sense. But you know what? This is part of a scheme. And what we have to recognize realistically is this doesn't happen in a vacuum. This is not just a lawmaker just shooting this off at the side. This comes at the same time that you see the change in Florida in terms of how they will teach slavery and how they will teach what happened in slavery. You have to first change the idea that this was a horrible event. They now have to massage this and say, hey, there were some benefits to slavery. It made out pretty well. And then, and only then, can you say that this is not a horrific event worth providing reparations for.
You know, I said this the other day, and I want to get your thoughts on it. And again, it's absolutely no shade, as they say, toward Jewish individuals. Um, but imagine, I just want you to imagine. I want everyone to imagine um, them saying the Holocaust never happened. People saying these lawmakers saying, you know, you can't teach the Holocaust, or you can't teach how, or you could teach how the Jews benefited from the Holocaust. The reaction, Attorney Tarver, is something like that.
I think we used to be able to say that, but now they're doing the same thing with the Jews. You look at Robert Kennedy recently, where he talked about basically Anne Frank's experience not being as bad as vaccines. And you see, there are so many Holocaust deniers even now. We are involved in a very, very serious position. And so even the sacred area of the Holocaust, which was unassaultable, you couldn't even speak about it. You couldn't even say the word Hitler before. Now you have people who are openly assaulting that. And again, this is a deliberate scheme and plan by white supremacists to basically ensconce their position in America. I've said all along, and people laughed at me years and years going by when I said that white Americans would never allow for there to be a situation where they would have to cede power in America, white supremacists, and they would create an apartheid type state. I think that's exactly what we're seeing now. If people won't call it out, or ashamed to call it out, or afraid to call it out because of some backlash, this is what they count on. This is what they believe. And we're not hearing enough of a pushback, not just from Black Americans, but from white Americans.
Yeah, there isn't much pushback at all. It's a great point you're making, because we're not hearing any, and this is why and you guys are right. There have been and there remains Holocaust deniers, but the outrage doesn't seem to be there.
Well, how do you express outrage in America? You express outrage through media. It's one thing for me to be upset here, or someone to be upset in their home someplace, but there has to be someone on message, and there needs to be a concerted message. And unfortunately, I said all along, the important thing for Black Americans to be involved in is media. We need to establish our own media companies. But I never envisioned that we would only move toward establishing entertainment companies. and to the extent that our news sources are being stifled, our news sources don't exist, and our news sources basically deal with entertainment, we don't have that type of voice to be able to push things forward. And the other thing is, where are our Black leaders? Where are they? Who have you heard from in terms of having a strong message with this? And I'm not being critical. Right. I'm simply saying it's very difficult for leaders to emerge. There's so many factors that really stop that from happening. But I'm not sure that anyone has even really tried to emerge, in this forum, and that's very disappointing.
Yeah, Power 96 says Texas is showing their inner Jim Crow, and Power 96 is going by his podcast name today, the Oregon G Swack Sports. It's a YouTube channel. Check him out over there on YouTube. And then Dr. Thomas Braxton Jones Jr. says this is racism at its best, heading for dictatorship. If we can't see what is being done right in our face, our race is doomed. We must not sit back and continue to allow discrimination to continue. They are making it seem like we are the problem to democracy here in America. It's interesting. Austin Cooper says perhaps under new leadership, BET can be relevant on the issues of the day. And you bring, Austin highlights your point, Attorney Tarver, about Black media and how there's this move toward, has been a move for a while now toward just more entertainment. And then, of course, you have the black press, but there's been a move to kind of, quiet the black press.
Yeah, well, that's where the money is. Money's in entertainment. And look, this is America. We're heading, this is a capitalist system. People are entitled to make money. But this is a different time. And we should have been able to see exactly what was going to happen with the quelling of any real discourse, any real conversation about race. We shut up. We silenced ourselves in terms of talking about race because we became satisfied in a number of fronts. And I'm not going to go deeply into it, but having studied that, I mean, I think that we basically dropped the ball. The fact of the matter is simply this: we are great people, but we seem to be horrible strategists when it comes to dealing with these types of issues. We were totally flat-footed with all this and should have seen it coming. And now you see some really good strategy. And when I say good, I should say well-organized strategy on the part of the right, including the whole movement toward third parties and third-party candidates, specifically meant and backed by Republicans to dilute the black vote. This is such an incredible effort that we see going on here. And for some reason, we either don't seem to see it or we don't have the courage to call it out for what it is.
Wow. See, this is what happens when we bring Attorney Tarver on. Is that saying, again, I never really heard the saying until I came 10 years ago to the black press. Truth to power, speaking truth to power. And that's all Attorney Tarver does. Southbound 3000 says, is asking me to ask you, Attorney Tarver, your thoughts that they are trying to go back to slavery.
Well, they don't need to go back that far, but think about it. We have in a number of ways, we are the demonized class. What they've been able to do, what the right wing has been able to do successfully, is they've been able to co-opt a significant number of brown Americans, Latinos, because Latinos are the fastest growing class in America, the fastest growing group of people, and they've been able to co-opt them. With the number of Latinos in Texas, if they were aligned with black causes, that Texas wouldn't be what it is right now. But the right has successfully used religion, of which so many Latinos are firmly ensconced in, as a weapon against us. And, look, we are the original religious people because we are the ones who actually had to rely on our God to bring us through centuries of torture. And now all of that has been turned against us. So, there's so much hypocrisy here. And when you look at this bill, when you look at what they're trying to do in Texas, just to get back to the legal portion of this, what you have to really think about is this. This is really a race-based limitation bill. And it's ripe for legal challenge because what it does is it says, notwithstanding whatever evidence someone can produce that would call for reparations, which is the basis of our restorative system, notwithstanding what you can produce, we are saying black people do not deserve reparations. And that is race-based. And because it's race-based, it is unconstitutional to prohibit it on that basis.
Well, you would think it's unconstitutional until it gets to this particular Supreme Court, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. Again, when we look at what's going on here, we are in a really bad position because we have a Supreme Court that does not respect precedent. Precedent is what has allowed us to move forward as a society because we had predictability as to what the law was and the state of the law and where we stood. If you don't believe in precedent, as this Supreme Court has showed itself to do because they said that there is no precedent with Roe versus Wade, if you don't believe in precedent, then what do you stand for? The court can literally do anything it wants to do ideologically because you can justify anything in the law, realistically, just like you can justify anything in religion.
Well, Dr. Thomas Braxton Jones Jr. says African Americans need to stop the division among our own. He says, you are right. Our leaders need to stand up together, but we are divided. The next thing on the table is our civil rights only because we're divided.
Yeah, I mean, it is so obvious and yet so difficult because we're not monolithic. You know, we don't have just one belief and one voice. And there are a number of different people, you know, in the Black community who believe in conservatism. Hey, conservatism in and of itself is not a problem. White supremacy is the problem. But the problem is conservatism has become so entwined with white supremacy that it is difficult to to separate the two. And so, look, I think my thought has always been this, that we need to realistically develop one strong media source. And we can do that. You know, financially, we could do that. We could put our money together and do that. And just as Fox was strongly ideological and made this thing happen for the right wing, because they couldn't do all this without Fox.
Right.
We can develop media that does exactly the same thing for our people. We're in a desperate time, and desperate times call for desperate measures. And I'm waiting for someone who is a strong media presence. You know, give me a Byron Allen, give me someone else who to see the light and say, you know what, let's do this for the safety, security, and survival of Black people.
Yeah, and finally on this topic too, I got to bring this up because he's absolutely right. Power 96 says the state of Alabama just told the U.S. Supreme Court to go to hell. They are not drawing new maps. That's essentially what they said to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
how did they get away with that, Attorney Topper?
Well, they haven't gotten away with it yet, because what's happened is, and this looks a lot more crazy than probably it really is, because it does happen from time to time. This case was remanded or sent back to the state of Alabama for the state of Alabama to do what it was supposed to do by way of the court. What Alabama is doing is they are playing a time-based game here. So what they're saying is, okay, we're starting the process and we've decided that this is what we're going to do. They know that they have to comply. So what they're going to do is they're going to force the other side, and it's headed up by Eric Holder, to go into court to make them comply, which then starts the process longer again. And guess what? Oh, well, we've got our House elections coming up. Unfortunately, we didn't make it in time. So we'll have to go in the next cycle to be able to implement this in time to actually, and it's a game. It's a realistic game that they're playing here.
It's like you said earlier, strategy.
Yeah. They're very, look, I always talked about people being deviously smart. You know, and just understand this. There are groups who that exist, foundations that exist, organizations that exist, that are funded with millions and millions of dollars, and all they do is strategize as to how to seize power. We don't have that. Yeah. We do not have that. You know, we have groups that are marginally funded that strategize on how to survive. It's big difference.
Big difference. Big difference. And let me throw this one out there too before we move on. Southbound 3000 says, how can a race of people overcome all the federal judges being lined up? It's really killing us.
I mean, as a question, the fact is that we can actually survive the federal judiciary, because Joe Biden has probably appointed more judges than any other president in the history of this country. What we can't survive at this point with any real structure is this Supreme Court. Ultimately, you can do anything at the lower level courts, and if you know that you cannot get past the gatekeepers, the Supreme Court, you have a problem. The other thing that would change things significantly is the idea of forum shopping, that you can pick the forum that you want to bring a particular case in. So I propose two things. Either you're going to expand that court, the Supreme Court, or you're going to employ term limits. I prefer to see term limits. There's no reason why we should have 90-year-olds making decisions about legal issues. I mean, look, their clerks are making a large part of those decisions. I'm not supposed to tell anybody. That's the lawyer's big secret. Those clerks are really busy. You tell the clerk where you want to go, and the clerk gets into the law and does what he's supposed to do. But those changes have to come.
Yeah. Well, on Tuesday, tomorrow, President Joe Biden will sign a proclamation establishing a national monument honoring Emmett Till, of course, the 14-year-old Black teenager whose tragic lynching in 1955 ignited a nationwide outcry against racial injustice and discrimination. It's named the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Monument. The historic memorial will span 3 sites in Illinois and Mississippi, symbolizing locations that played a central role in Till's heartbreaking story. The new monument will protect places that tell the story of Emmett Till's too short life and racially motivated murder, the unjust acquittal of his murderers, and the activism of his mother, who courageously brought the world's attention to the brutal injustices and racism of the time, catalyzing the civil rights moment, according to a release from the White House. This memorial, the 3 sites that's going to be a part of it, Attorney Tarver, talk about, if you will, the importance of even acknowledging this, especially given the time we've been talking about, the time we now live in.
Yeah, we need to recount and remember our history. It is really important that we chronicle what white America has done to Black Americans. And that's not a racist statement. That is history. We know what happened in this country, and the Emmett Till story is part of that. But you know why this is also important? There's instruction in the Emmett Till story that we could take away for today. And that is this: the power of imagery can change hearts and minds. It was that open casket that changed the direction of the civil rights movement in America, the hearts and minds of white Americans. Now, we talk about having a problem with gun control, but you know what? No one wants to show the mutilated bodies of children who are killed by these things. If you want to change things, you must show people what is happening. That's the only way that things changed with Emmett Till. That's the way things changed in Vietnam, when people started to see, oh my goodness, this is what's happening to our soldiers. People need to see what is happening. We become very numb when we discuss these stories about gun violence, because look, even though it's happening in schools and their children, it's happening every day to our children in our neighborhoods. But the whole idea is, if you show people, if you allow them to see, they will either be able to deal with it on a regular basis of seeing slaughtered bodies, faces, heads, crushed heads, things of that nature, or not be able to deal with it. But either way, you can't allow people to sanitize horrible, violent acts.
Yeah, and I believe that you're 100% right. Let them see it, and also we talked a lot. We have talked on this program a lot about if it were to happen to them. Sometimes people need to, if it happens to you, it becomes more real, more personal. When we talked about the gun laws and the shootings and things of that nature, these the right wing who doesn't want to have any type of gun control, we always say if it happens to them, that's another thing too, right? I mean, they got to see it, and sometimes they got to feel it, right?
Well, you know what's really interesting? It has happened to them in their areas and in their neighborhoods, and they've still not changed their minds. There is an incredible mental force that's going on in America that allows certain people to see things that are real and put before their eyes, and to deny that they're happening. I mean, that's what the whole Trumpist movement is about. That's what the MAGA movement is about. That's what QAnon is about. The fact that you can put reality in front of people and they have an out to be able to say, well, this is not this. And people will say, look, hey, Second Amendment allows this, and it's important, and that outweighs what happened to me and my family. It's amazing.
It makes me think of, the other day, Tony Bennett died at the age of 96, but he wrote in his autobiography what changed him what opened his eyes, not changed him, but what opened his eyes. He was in the military, and he was hanging out with black soldiers. And when a captain, he was a lieutenant, and when a captain approached him and saw that he was hanging out with black soldiers, the captain spit on him and gave him a task of digging up bodies as punishment. And when he got a call from Harry Belafonte to join the civil rights movement, that Tony Bennett said stuck out in his mind. He's like, absolutely, I'm going to do it. And he marched to Selma with King and the rest of them, and really was among those celebrities who supported Dr. King in the civil rights movement. Sometimes, that personal experience does translate to something.
And getting back to chronicling history, one of the things we have to make sure that we chronicle accurately is that there were white voices who stood up for Black Americans during that whole period of unrest, the civil rights. We're calling it the civil rights movement, but quite frankly, we're involved currently in the civil rights movement. But during that period, we made allies, and that's what we seem to have a problem doing now, is making allies.
Why is that?
I think in large part because we have been so demonized that there are people who believe that Black people are toxic, and the Black cause has now become toxic in a number of ways. But what I think people fail to realize is that the Black struggle for equality is the American struggle for equality. And as they treat us, they will treat others, other minorities in America, women in America. We're all basically in the same boat. It's just that we happen to be the flavor of the month to be able to demonize because we're the least powerful. We've probably never had that significant amount of power, but we just don't have the power or the wherewithal. We don't combine economically. We don't support each other politically, and as such, we are marginalized.
Mm-hmm. Well, tomorrow at the White House, the president is going to sign the proclamation on those 3 historic sites dedicated to Emmett Till and his mom. Look forward to being there at the signing tomorrow, and we'll bring you some information from that historic event. Attorney Tarver, we turn our attention now to something that we haven't talked about on this program, but we're going to talk about it a little bit in a different way. Carlee Russell, that is the disappearance of the Black Alabama nursing student, which made national headlines. The perfect reaction that advocates and family members hope for to help solve a case. But in the aftermath of her reappearance, 49 hours after she vanished last week, the Hoover Police Department has cast undeniable doubt on the 25-year-old story, saying that authorities have been unable to verify most of her statements to investigators. Authorities also revealed that investigators found, quote, strange internet searches on her cell phone in the days and hours before her disappearance about the cost of Amber Alerts in the movie Taken, which depicts, of course, kidnappings by human traffickers. But even though holes have emerged in her story, experts say that the public should still react with the same alarm they showed in Russell's case when other people of color go missing. Natalie Wilson, said of the co-founder, I should say, of the Black and Missing Foundation, said one case should really not set a precedent for all missing person cases of color. She goes on to say, studies have shown that missing people of color garner far less media attention than missing white people, even though people of color make up a significant portion of the hundreds of thousands who go missing every year in the United States. Data from the National Crime Information Center shows that nearly 40% of those reported missing in the U.S. last year were people of color, despite, of course, Black Americans making up just 13% of the population. And just to go along with that, Attorney Tarver, Black women and girls accounted for nearly 98,000 people out of the more than 546,000 Americans who were reported missing in 2022. This case is hard to swallow,
yeah,
but
Look,
Go ahead.
look, one of the burden that the horrible burden that we bear in America is that we are judged by the singular act or singular bad act of a black person, and so they tar us with all that. Where white people have the luxury of being individuals, you know, in the media. There is no reason why this should affect anything, and I'm not going to yet call this an illegitimate case, but I'm going to say there is no reason why any legitimate case of a missing person should ever be affected by what has happened here. I mean, look, when somebody shows up within 48 to 72 hours, that's always an issue, you know, as to their credibility when it comes to either being, you know, taken or whatever, if you can't produce the evidence. But we have people who are gone and they're still gone. You know, they're not showing up. These missing women and girls and men have been off the scene for you know, for years, some of them. So we're not really talking about apples and oranges. I mean, apples and apples here. We're talking about apples and oranges. They're completely different scenarios. But as we look at what is happening in America, those cases are actually increasing. The number of women, girls that are actually missing. And, you know, there is discussion and thought that, you know, these people are being taken for, you know, not just human trafficking reasons, but you know, they're just for purposes of violence. So, you know, we look, no matter what, we have to be vigilant. We have to be very careful, but we also have to be very aggressive in making sure that we approach all of these missing cases as if they're legitimate.
Well, even in this case, let's say that it is total, you know, it looks like it was a hoax, right? And say it is. But even in this case, don't we need to find out what drove her to do this?
No.
No.
No, I'm being somewhat facetious. You know,
something's going on in her life.
I had that conversation with my daughter and my son. They're younger. You know, they are very critical, and they point out that, look, notwithstanding whatever made you do this, whether or not it's mental illness or anything else like that, that's important. It's important to know whether.
How could it happen right in her own bedroom in an affluent community? Who could have done this?
Within 24 hours of her disappearance.
Sorry.
No,
but that is depicting the coverage that normally is afforded for white individuals, right? And you see Elizabeth Smart and her dad there, and the nonstop, you know, coverage. But getting back to what you were saying, though, Attorney Tarver, I don't want to miss that point because you know, whether it's mental illness or whatever. Go ahead, I'll let you continue.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the cost in all of this, the resources that are expended, you know, that you direct police and law enforcement resources away from certain things to be able to deal with these types of things. That's an important issue, and we should make it very clear that illegitimate claims will be punished and illegitimate claims will be taken seriously. You know, recall, unfortunately, the name escapes me, but remember the South Carolina case of the woman who accused the black man of basically taking her car and drowning her children.
And drowning her kids,
yeah. With Christopher, Charles, I can't remember the name, in Boston, doing the same type of thing. You know, these illegitimate claims are a huge problem. And notwithstanding, hey, you can have mental illness or whatever else like that, but we have to deal with them as being serious, because there are a lot of people who don't have mental illness and use these types of things as a ruse to get out of either we've had some of these with the people who are having affairs, you know, and get caught. And, you know, oh boy, I got to think of a story. How do I get out of this? Well, they took me. We got to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we know, again, so what's interesting, we know that the attention is rarely given to a missing person of color, particularly, and we've done this many times on this program. We've written about it many times, particularly Black women and Black girls. And so what's interesting to me, Attorney Tarver, and looking at this case with Carlee, I'm not exactly certain why it got the attention it got when she was allegedly missing, because normally there's very little attention. I mean, what was it about Carlee and in the time that she was believed to be missing that brought the media out this time?
I think it was a confluence of things. Number one, there was allegedly a child involved. There was supposed to be this toddler who came out to the highway and and lured her into this whole situation. And I think because the question was whether or not this is a new type of ruse, because that's one of the things that really fascinates people, the new type of fraud to be able to get people to do something. Hey, look, who wouldn't stop for a toddler who's in distress? Who wouldn't stop if they saw a child on the side of the road?
Right.
And to use that type of thing and say, wow, that's just a fraud. So now you can't even stop for that. I think that became very sensationalized because people really needed to know. Look, she made a phone call. It all seems so frightening and real. And all of us, I have daughters. I thought about my daughter when that happened. I said, wow, my daughter would probably stop to do something. We got to figure out what's going on here. So Americans, I think, were able to personalize this story in such a way. If you have a daughter or a wife or a mother or anyone like that, a female who might be in a nurturing state of mind to see a child on the side of the road, and that's a ruse that's being used to take them. I think that's what people really were looking at here.
Well, and certainly you're right. It's a woman, a mother figure, would be more inclined to say a child, but I think men as well. You and I probably would stop too if we saw a toddler on the side of the road by him or herself. So,
well, hopefully I don't have the value of being taken. Usually they're not taking men. They may shoot us and kill us, but they're not taking us. Putting us into human trafficking and things like that. So that's why I think that the vulnerability of women really comes into play here.
Yeah, no question about it. Well, it's going to be, there's going to be more details coming out. We know just as hard as social media can be, they're going to top it with this because let's face it, look, this is a Black woman, and it's just the nature of the beast today, right? We've been talking about how the mindset of this country and the particularly the leaders of this country, the political leaders, and the mindset that they have. And so this certainly does not help at all, that if it is indeed proven to be just that, a hoax. I know her boyfriend, Carlee's boyfriend, has been taking to social media and putting out statements, give her space. But folks are relentless.
Yeah, and look, she didn't ask for a national platform. Let's think about that. Whatever she did, she didn't seek a national platform. She didn't call the media and say that, but the circumstances generated that. And I'm sure whatever was happening, she didn't envision that being this big of a story or that big of a platform. But we are where we are with this whole thing. And I really just hope the young lady gets some help if it in fact does come to fruition that this was a hoax.
Yeah, shades of Tawana Brawley.
Yeah, well, hey, we're dating ourselves, right?
Yes, indeed. We definitely are. It's a name that I know Reverend Al Sharpton never likes to hear publicly mentioned.
No, not Al, not C. Vernon Mason, not the Ultimatics. Way back when in New York City. So, but look, how many of those types of cases involve white females? So many, and we don't know their names. But you and I can just call off Tawana Brawley, in an instant like that. There is a double standard, and there's no question
without question. So, Attorney Tarver, an interesting thing is happening down in Alabama. A Black man says he was elected as mayor in a small town there, but he's been kept from taking office by white leaders of the town. Now he's filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. Patrick Braxton is one of several plaintiffs named in Braxton et al. Versus Stokes et al. The other plaintiffs, James Ballard, Barbara Patrick, Janice Quarles, and Wanda Scott, are people that Braxton hoped to name to the city council of New Bern, Alabama, after he was elected to office in 2020. However, Braxton said that the minority white residents of New Bern, long accustomed to exercising total control over the government, refused to accept the outcome. Haywood Stokes III, the acting mayor of New Bern, instead allegedly worked with acting town council members to hold a special election where he was reappointed to the mayoral seat in keeping Braxton from taking office and carrying out his duties.
Aren't we tired of hearing these stories from Alabama? I mean,
Yes.
at what point do we recognize that they have just made a conscious decision that they are going to be racist, that they are going to be openly hostile toward Black people, and they are not going to cede power in any way, shape, form, or fashion? And so the way that we deal with these types of situations, and it's the way that we should be dealing with the situation in Florida with DeSantis and others with these districts who are going to teach a revised version of history. You got to sue them. That's it. You got to sue. They have limited budgets, very limited budgets. Mm-hmm. And we need to take a page out of Thurgood Marshall's and Charles Hamilton Houston's playbook and go from district to district, file these federal civil rights lawsuits, and make them have to defend them because they can't do it. You can't legitimately do it in a federal court. You know, there's only so far they can go with regard to this. And so, look, this guy, they locked him out of City Hall. He's the mayor, and he can't even get into City Hall. You know, at what point are we going to? And look, these are crimes. These are federal crimes, and so it is important that Merrick Garland and his Justice Department, his Department of Justice, you know, wake up to what's going on in these smaller districts like Alabama and like Newburgh. They can bring federal civil rights violations against these individuals, criminal federal civil rights violations.
Yeah, this is a town that is has only had white mayors in the past, but interestingly, it's 85% Black. The town's population is 85% Black. David Youngblood saying, why can't the U.S. Marshals go in and take the keys away from those who lost? And I guess it goes to your point. It would have to be the Department of Justice says, you know what, we'll take care of this, right?
Yeah. You know, and it doesn't just have to be the Department of Justice. You know, you have your state police. Mm-hmm. You have a number of different law enforcement agencies who could come together and do something. But it begs the question, why hasn't that happened thus far? I mean, I don't believe, since he's filed a federal civil rights lawsuit, I don't believe that they've just been sitting on their hands doing nothing. They have to have reached out to other parties and not gotten any relief. And that's the problem. And that's what the issue is with Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, these southern states who just don't want to do the right thing. The only thing you can do is make them pay for this financially. That's the only thing they seem to respect. Look, we can't wield physical power because we're outnumbered. We can't wield electoral power, as we see in Newburgh, places like this, because they're not going to allow it to happen. Also with Alabama on the broad scale that we talked about earlier today, with them defying the Supreme Court. The only thing is for these states that are not well financed, because Alabama is not a capitalized state, you can make them pay financially. And that's where organizations like the National Bar Association and smaller organizations really have to kind of take up the ball and run with it.
Yeah, you know, again, when you mentioned Florida, but and then of course there's here we're talking about Alabama, places like Mississippi. It's becoming increasingly difficult for African Americans to live in places like a New Bern, Alabama, even though they represent 85% of that population. In Jackson, they represent 80% of the population in Mississippi. But it's become increasingly difficult for them to live there. Something needs to be done, Attorney Tarver.
Well, what they're showing you is what they felt all along, which is you don't need to be here. We don't want you here. You know, we're going through this controversy with this Jason Aldean, the small town song, where he's talking about what would happen to you in a small town. Well, we know what happens in a small town. The fact of the matter is, we lived in a small town called America for 400 years, and we've seen exactly what a small town is like. So the fact is here, they're letting us know. And as the phrase has been tossed around so much these days, you know, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. They're showing you that they're racist and they don't want you around. Believe them. So what you gonna do about it?
That's the other interesting thing. You mentioned Jason Aldean, and you know, he talked about the small towns, sundown towns, and everything. He's mentioned in that song, and you know what the connotation there is, of course. And all this controversies. CMT says they're taking the video down, and et cetera, et cetera. And yet the song goes #1. But then you have other entertainers, white entertainers, who have come out and back far right legislation, far right activities. It's so interesting because during the civil rights movement, you had certain entertainers, black entertainers, backing the civil rights movement. Now it seems that it's the other way around. You got these entertainers coming out openly backing white supremacy.
Yeah, you know, we've done a full reversal in this country, and that's why I said started off the program in the beginning talking about what a fascinating time we live in. You know, one thing that we're starting to see is the power of media. Media, right-wing media, has made it comfortable for these people to come out and basically express the idea that they don't care for us. You know, and whereas oh my goodness, you couldn't even say that before. Oh, he said this. No, they can say whatever the heck they want to say right now,
Right.
because there is a forum for it, and there is no backlash. And they have a national media source, which is Fox News, Newsmax, and others, to be able to express those views that are racist. Because what they want to do is they want to make it very comfortable, you know, to say that, oh, this is First Amendment. We have the right to be able to say, you know, what we want to say. And now we have a forum to be able to say it. So this is really part, again, of a larger strategy. And they finally manipulated media, manipulated the courts, manipulated the political systems to get to where they wanted to get. This is where they wanted to be for a very long time. They've hid behind cloaked racism, catchphrases, and now they can come out in the wide open because they've conditioned minds to say that this is First Amendment and people should be able to say whatever they want to say, notwithstanding whether it's racist.
Yeah. And of course, again, making that connection from the 50s and 60s, you had, you know, those white politicians openly racist, right? And that seemed to have, you know, they went back sort of in the closet in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? And now today you have the right wing, MAGA loving, et cetera, making racist remarks openly, even to the extent that we talked earlier in the program that Representative Babin of Texas with this legislation that he wants to punish any municipality or state who offers reparations for slavery.
It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And they are daring and challenging us to do anything about it. And so far we've fallen short. But they're not only challenging us, as I said before, what they are doing is they are manipulating the electoral system. They are putting forward these third-party candidates and this so-called third-party system, which can only do one thing, which is to dilute votes from Joe Biden. And we don't even recognize the whole idea that this is a setup. So much of social media that is critical of Joe Biden, so much of social media that is advancing the right-wing causes from Black people are actually sponsored by the right wing. And we don't even recognize what's going on here. Now, look, I'm not the biggest Joe Biden fan in the world, but, you know, I'm also not the biggest fan of police in certain circumstances because I sue them. But when someone is breaking into my house and I need to call them, I become a supporter real quick. And so, you know, it's all about where your interests lie at a particular time. And our interests as Black Americans lies with crushing this MAGA movement. That should be supreme. It doesn't matter if you believe that, both sides don't do this and both sides. No, 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 no. There will only be one side if you don't recognize that one side is a problem.
Yeah, you mentioned the third party, but also within the Democratic Party, there's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his words, as Greer says, being elevated by Republicans.
He's not. He is not a Democrat. He is supported by the right wing. He is financed by the right wing. His $9 million that he raised significantly came from the right wing, and he is masquerading as a Democrat. He is their spoiler. Fortunately, he seems to be imploding, but he is meant to be their spoiler. And quite frankly, he is drawing some votes. We tend to get captivated. We, as Black people, tend to get captivated on certain issues. Vaccines are one of the things that we bought into. You remember Kyrie Irving and some of the other athletes who took a platform and that became a big thing in our community. And so now that's being raised again, and it's being raised in such a way that he is the champion of it, and he is the one who's exposing it, and he is telling you about the conspiracy, and that's attractive to some people. We seem to search for it's not enough to know what actually is, but we got to prove that something's different, and this is what this guy is doing. Between this and no labels, we got a problem. We've got a real problem.
Power 96 says, I tried to tell my Black people when they sat at home and didn't vote for Hillary, Mitch McConnell was going to place Klan conservatives as federal and U.S. Supreme Court judges. And Austin Cooper says that RFK Jr.'s father and Uncle Jack and Teddy are turning in their graves in shame.
Clearly.
Wow.
That family has given so much, in terms of the movement. And I'm not going to, canonize them, but they've given a lot, and they stood for a lot. Particularly his father. His father was an incredible figure, and would have been an incredible figure had he lived, because he was one of the few figures that was able to unify poor white people with Black people. And along with Martin Luther King, with the Poor People's Campaign, and move things forward. And so, yeah, I think he's doing more than spinning in his grave. I mean, this has got to be very painful for the entire family to see him emerge like this.
Yeah, there's been members of that family who put out statements condemning what Junior is doing there. So very, very interesting. Attorney Tarver is always bringing things into their right perspectives. We certainly appreciate you and that tie you're wearing. I love that tie.
This is summertime tie here. You gotta do something. Look, we've been talking about some depressing things here. I gotta do something to brighten up life. This is my contribution to America today.
The fashion plate of attorneys. There he is, the one and only Attorney Tarver. Check him out, look him up. He's in Jersey. He's got his hands full, but hey, call him anyway if you need some a good legal advice or a good legal defense or whatever he's doing over there. Call him up.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on, and thank you all for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.